If there's one thing you take from this video, it's that you can change your life if you want to, and you can get started right now. Today, I want to share how I transformed my life, how I went from what I perceived to be a stable career to something totally creative. I never imagined I'd be the person to have a career change because I always got the messaging, just stick with what you know. If you have grit and just are strong through the hardships, you will have success. And so for many years, I really just kept my head down, kept working, pushed through even when my gut was telling me something's not right here. But eventually the dissatisfaction caught up with me and I was able to make a change. And now doing entirely creative work, I make significantly more money than I would have made if I had stuck with the stable career. Today, I want to give you specific strategies, things I did to make this possible. To give you a bit of context, I got my PhD in clinical psychology, and toward the end of that PhD, I realized I just wasn't satisfied. I did like a lot of the content, I liked some of the creative work of research, but in the long run, I realized academia just wasn't right for me, and I wanted something else. So I eventually pivoted. I now work as a podcast producer and as a YouTuber. But in the meantime, I also worked as a photographer and videographer. So I kind of did a variety of things to make it work. When I was going through this transition, there was a lot of self-doubt, a lot of just questions about, will I be able to do this? Will I fail? How will people judge me? If they find my work on the internet or what I'm up to now, will they talk behind my back? There were a lot of what ifs and fears around that. And then when I actually made this shift, I wasn't making a lot of money at first. It was hard. I continued to question myself. I wondered if I had made a mistake. Not fully because I knew I was happier, but definitely in the financial sense. Was this a smart decision? But eventually it took time and my work grew and allowed me to sustain a lifestyle just living on my creative work. I also want to add the acknowledgement that there are things you can control and things you can't. And sometimes environmental factors might impact your ability to pursue something or just make it harder. And I gotta acknowledge there were some ways I was privileged on this journey. I did have the support of some immediate family members and some close friends that really allowed me to pursue this and to believe I could do it. And I also have been in a marriage where there are two incomes, which just makes everything a little bit more stable. So some people might have an even harder path than I did, but I still want to share these strategies because I think they really helped me. The first strategy I'd recommend is to start building something before you up and quit. Basically, I worked kind of secretly as a photographer for a year before leaving my previous career. I built up a portfolio, I started getting actual gigs and shooting weddings, and I was practicing my skills a lot. I had a very specific plan, and I knew I needed to develop a certain level of income before I could entirely quit my other roles. Part of this is having a specific, concrete plan and a strategy for monetization. Because if you don't have that, it might be hard to get it up and running. That doesn't mean that your plan won't change later. Like, I don't work anymore as a photographer, even just a few years later. That role helped bridge the gap to figure out what type of a creative role I wanted in the long run. A second strategy is to educate yourself and do the reps. Take the time to read books, to engage with media about the topic that you're trying to explore. Ask questions to people you know in the field. I really think that doing is the best way of learning. And so for me, when I first started out doing photography and videography, I just was constantly taking photos and videos and getting faster at adjusting my camera, learning how to just navigate the camera itself and how to use it in a way that was smart. And then gradually I gained confidence and I felt like I could throw myself into scenarios where I was actually getting paid. I also think that one of the best resources for self-education and something that really helped me learn a lot as I made this transition is Skillshare, the sponsor of today's video. Skillshare is an online learning platform where you can take classes on all kinds of topics. You may know Skillshare as a place where you can take classes on creative things like photography or design, which is true, but it also has classes on useful career-focused topics. They have classes on things like Etsy, on e-commerce, on the logistics of building your own business, or even classes on how to unlock your own creativity. Most recently, I was taking the course Mind Growth, Learn a Transformational Approach to a Fulfilling Creative Life, created by Mimi Chow. She's this woman who used to work as a lawyer and now is this very successful illustrator, and she shared all her knowledge about her story and how she made her career transition. I've taken a bunch of classes on Skillshare that have helped me build my own career, things on time management, on personal branding, or just actually starting your own business that have really helped me in that process. What's really exciting is that I have a great offer for you right now. If you're interested in just trying out Skillshare, the first 1,000 people to hit the link in the description box below will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So you can even try it out for yourself, binge a bunch of topics, learn a bunch of new things from classes, and see what you think for yourself. From personal experience and what I've learned, I highly recommend Skillshare. I think it's just one of the best resources for preparing yourself for the real world. A third tip is to just dive in. Just go for it. If, say, you're thinking of starting a YouTube channel, just start posting your first videos. When I first started YouTube, I look back on some of my first videos and I'm very cringy about how I presented things and how the camera was like super far away from me, and I just did not like my first handful of videos. They're still there if you want to go look at them. But I just started to do it. I didn't question myself forever. I mean, I did question myself, but I didn't let that stop me from just starting to post. And even when I posted, I didn't really think that it would blow up or that I'd become a regular YouTuber, but I was just sort of doing it for fun. I still wanted to explore that area of creativity, and so I just started doing it, putting it out there, and I'm glad that I let myself take that risk. I'm glad that I didn't listen to the negative self-talk or the fears around, will people find this? Will they judge it? I just did it anyway, even though I felt those things. Same with starting my photography business. I first just started practicing with a camera. I took a bunch of photos of family and friends, built up some kind of portfolio, built a website and Instagram, and then people just started to hire me, even people I had no connections with, just based off of the work I already was showing. A fourth strategy is to find multiple sources of income and to be working multiple strategies at once, if possible. Obviously, if you're having a lot of success in one area, maybe just use that, focus on that. But for me, it was a process of dabbling here, dabbling there, finding various sources of income. It was sort of a patchwork quilt of jobs to make it work. But the point is, start playing around with different options. If you have multiple sources of income, if one starts to fail, you're not totally lost. And then you can also figure out what you actually enjoy and what you want to spend your time doing. Because when you start out, you don't necessarily know. And ultimately, it's about finding something that's kind of a combination of what you enjoy, what you're maybe naturally good at, and what there's some kind of demand for. It's that perfect combination or Venn diagram of those three things that allows you to succeed, in my opinion. And sometimes that takes trying things out and having them fail. A fifth tip is to recognize that there will be ebbs and flows. I remember on one episode of Queer Eye, there was somebody who was starting a new business, and one of the main characters told this person, hey, I always give myself at least 5 years before I judge my new business because it does take time. Sometimes it works out well. Sometimes there are periods where it's harder or where I'm just afraid I'm going to fail. And you have to weather a lot of those ebbs and flows and moments of self-questioning if you're going to be able to succeed in the long run. Now, obviously, this piece of advice needs to be taken with a grain of salt. If you're like dropping a whole bunch of money on something and it is just not paying off at all and you're not enjoying it, maybe that is a sign that you just stop doing it. But if you're just going through a somewhat slower patch or it's not going as quickly as you'd hoped, it doesn't mean you have to just give up. I bring that up though because there are a lot of potentially problematic companies out there like MLMs that might take a lot of your money and might not give you the payoff you're hoping for. But as long as you're checking that everything you're doing is sort of legitimate, above board, and that you have a plan for how to continue to improve, it's okay to have some slow times. It's part of the risk you take. It's part of what the challenge is. Sometimes you might even have people in your life questioning what you're doing. I know I definitely have had many conversations with people in my life kind of asking, well, how are you going to do that? And just kind of acting a little bit skeptical or wondering why I'm doing that. And it's hard to take in those moments and just say, I'm not listening to all that noise. I'm going to focus on me and what I'm doing. And part of it is just recognizing your own value. and believing in that value. And so I really struggled with that. I think that's why I didn't even initially choose a creative path. It was because I had all this negative self-talk and just assumed that other people were more creative, more skilled, more able than I was. But now I decide to just not listen to those negative thoughts, and gradually over time, I have fewer and fewer of them because I've just thrown myself into the work and focused on that. Another strategy is to have formal check-ins with yourself, where you look at the progress you've made and you determine what has worked well and what hasn't worked. And with this, I want to emphasize the part about what has worked well, because I think it's easy to get bogged down and to focus on all the things you haven't done right, all the things that have gone wrong, and to get into this negative spiral of doom. If instead you can focus on what has worked and capitalize on that, and not only try to continue to do that, but to expand upon that, I think you're more likely to be successful, as opposed to trying to fix all your flaws, which maybe try to work on them, whatever. Instead of focusing on that, focusing on what you naturally do well, what you naturally gravitate toward, what you bring to the table, and to take advantage of that, I think you're more likely to succeed in the long run, both kind of emotionally, but also financially. A seventh strategy is to use organizational online tools and to eventually delegate. Running your own business, especially a creative one, can be really challenging. And so gradually over time, I've taken advantage of online tools that are readily accessible to me, things like Canva, where I can do graphic design, create my thumbnails, or just different promotional materials, or free online invoice generators. Those types of things just make my life a little bit easier and a little more streamlined. I also realized that getting a slightly more stable job, where I also do something creative through a company, has helped sort of delegate some of the stress of running my own business, because I do have this podcasting job, which I absolutely love. I create audio documentaries, I do a lot of interviews, and then we turn all those interviews into a series. And I love the work, but it's also nice that the business side of things is not on my shoulders, like I'm working for somebody else. But that's not the only source of my income. It's not my only focus. And that way I also have this sense of independence. And then more recently, one thing I've done is hired a video editor to help with my YouTube videos. For up until very recently, I edited all my videos myself, and it was one of the most time-consuming tasks. And so for me, one thing to just be smart about my time and to be able to have more time to think about the content of videos, or to get more B-roll, or to in other ways improve the quality of my videos, I thought, you know what, if I could save that time from editing to send it to somebody who's going to do a faster job, a better job, I think I should do that. And so I started doing that. Shout out to the video editor here today who's editing this video. Thank you so much. And I have to say, part of it is figuring out what types of delegation works for you or will save you the most time. Maybe if you're a really fast video editor, maybe video editing isn't the thing to outsource. Maybe it's getting a manager. I have not yet gotten a manager. But for me, this is what made my life more streamlined and just improved the quality of my life. An eighth tip is to follow what interests you. And I say this because if you're going to do a creative career, if you're going to take that risk, part of the reason you're doing it is in order to have a life that maybe you love more, to actually enjoy your time working. And so if you're finding that you're not enjoying your time, maybe it's time to pivot, because if you do what you're naturally drawn to, I think ultimately the product is just going to be so much better. And an example of this for me is when I was doing photography and videography, I did a whole bunch of weddings. I would be on my feet all day, holding sometimes really heavy gear, especially if I was doing the videography component of the wedding. And I'd have to follow people around and always just like be on the ready for anything, even do things like fix the bride's bustle or clean up a mess if that's what the moment called for. And it was just very physically draining. I ended up enjoying it less and less as time went on. And so I guess my point with that is that eventually, I did reduce how much time I was doing that type of work. And now I'm focusing more on my podcasting job and YouTube. If I had kept going with that, I probably would have eventually burned out. So I guess ultimately my point is to really sort of lead with your heart, use your head, but lead with your heart, and follow what excites you, what interests you, what you're organically drawn to. Because if you do that, ultimately you'll be willing to work harder, longer hours, Not that I'm trying to push over productivity because I think that can be really toxic, but you do want to work harder if you like it. And then also the final product will probably be better. So I know all of these strategies might feel overwhelming. You might still have self-doubt. Believe me, I still have self-doubt, but it is incredible to just think that just a handful of years ago, I was living an entirely different life. I was in a very strict hierarchy of academia where I was not happy. I was working for other people rather than myself. I was focused on extrinsic reward as opposed to enjoying the work itself. In the long run, my career is more lucrative now, and I'm so glad that I took that risk on myself, even when I had some self-doubt, to pursue a life that I really love. So there you have it. I made this video actually because I made another video about my whole career change that gets more into like my personal life. And on that video, I received comments like, well, I would love to know the logistics of how you actually made that transition. And so this is me creating that video that was requested, but I hope that it answered some of your questions. And definitely if you have any other questions, add them in the comments below because I can always make another video like this if that's of interest. If it's not, let me know that too. And I'd also love to hear any of your stories. Maybe you're thinking about a career transition, or you've already started one, or it's 10 years behind you and you're doing great. I'd love to hear your story as well. Anyway, thanks so much for spending this little bit of time with me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.